He promised he'd be home before dinner. He even left his coat behind, but that coat became the only thing that ever returned. The streetlights flickered on as the small town of Millford settled into another quiet evening. Inside a weathered blue house at the end of Maple Street, James wiped the oil from his hands and hung his work jacket on the same hook by the door. The smell of stew drifted from the kitchen where his daughter Lila stirred the pot with both hands gripping the wooden spoon too tightly for a 10-year-old. James smiled the way fathers do when home feels like peace. He crouched down and kissed the top of Lila's head. "Be good for your mom, kiddo. I'll be home before dinner." The same promise every night, said with the same half grin. Lila nodded, not knowing it would be the last time she heard it. Outside, the wind carried the sound of the train that passed 3 blocks away. James walked down the front steps, the porch light humming behind him. The door closed. The jacket stayed. That night should have been just another Tuesday, but an hour later, the phone rang, and the sound of that ring split the air like glass. Margaret, his wife, answered. The words accident, highway, and no survivors came from the other end. The wooden spoon fell from Lila's hands. The jacket never moved again. In the weeks that followed, the house grew smaller, quieter. The smell of oil faded from the hallway. Margaret folded James's shirts, boxed his boots, gave away his tools, but she left the jacket hanging. Every time Lila asked, her mother said, "It stays there. He said he'd be home before dinner." Why do we keep what hurts us most? Years passed like pages turning too slowly. Seasons changed outside that door, but inside, time felt stuck in that single promise. Lila learned to walk around the coat, not through it. She learned the sound of silence and the weight of things unsaid. On the anniversary of James's death, Margaret lit a candle near the door. The flame flickered, reflected on the metal hook. "He'd want us to move on," she whispered, but neither of them did. They just watched the coat sway slightly, as if stirred by someone unseen. Every night, when the train passed, Lila would imagine her father stepping off, brushing the dust from his sleeves, saying he got delayed, that everything was fine now. She'd picture him reaching for that same coat, slipping it on, smiling the way he used to, and every night, she'd wake before the smile finished forming. 10 years went by. Lila turned 20. The house didn't change much. Same porch light, same squeaky floorboard near the kitchen, same coat by the door. Margaret still avoided looking at it for too long. Some memories sting more than they soothe. Then one evening, rain swept across the town, tapping on every window like impatient fingers. Lila returned from her late shift at the bookstore. She shook off her umbrella, placed her keys down, and saw the coat, still there, exactly as it had always been. But something was different. The door behind it was trembling slightly, as if someone was knocking from the other side. She froze. The sound came again. A soft thump. Another. Was it the wind or something else? The porch light outside flickered, the same way it did 10 years ago. Lila took one step closer, her heart hammering against her ribs. She reached for the doorknob. The air felt thick, heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. When she finally pulled it open, the rain rushed in, cold and sharp. No one was there. Just the smell of wet earth and the faint echo of train wheels in the distance. She exhaled, half relief, half disappointment. Then she noticed it. The coat had moved. It hung lower now, like someone had brushed past it, or maybe worn it. A single droplet slid down the sleeve, glistening in the porch light before it fell to the floor. She whispered into the dark, "Dad?" No answer, just rain, steady and endless. That night, Lila sat by the door, watching the coat sway slightly in the draft. She should have gone to bed, but she couldn't look away. For the first time in years, she felt something she didn't know how to name. Not fear, not grief, something in between. What if the past wasn't done speaking yet? The next morning, sunlight slipped through the blinds, painting the floor in thin golden stripes. The rain had stopped, but the house still smelled like last night. Damp wood, cold air, silence. Lila touched the coat gently. half expecting it to vanish. It didn't. She smiled to herself. Foolish? Maybe, but the kind of foolish that keeps people alive. Margaret entered quietly, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You were up late again," she said. Lila nodded without looking away. "The door was moving. I thought, never mind." Her mother didn't respond, just placed a mug on the table and whispered, "Sometimes the past knocks when it wants to be remembered." Then she walked away. All day, that sentence followed Lila. At work, in the bus, even while shelving books at the back of the store, she kept seeing the coat, hearing the rain, feeling the weight of the years that refused to pass. That night, she decided to stop being afraid of what the house was keeping. Lila brought the coat down from the hook. It was heavier than she imagined. The fabric smelled faintly of engine oil and rain, her father's scent, locked in time. She laid it across the kitchen table, flattening every fold, searching for something she didn't know how to name. Inside one of the inner pockets, her fingers brushed against a small envelope, sealed, yellowed by time, written on the front, in her father's handwriting, "My Lila, if I don't make it." Her breath caught. For a long minute, she just stared, unable to open it. When she finally tore the edge, her hands trembled. The letter began simple, steady, his voice in ink. "Lila, I'm leaving town tonight. You'll hear things about me, maybe bad ones, but I need you to know I'm doing this to protect people I work with. There are men hurting others, and I can't stay quiet anymore. If something happens, promise me you'll grow braver than I ever was." Lila pressed the letter to her chest, eyes burning. Her father hadn't abandoned them. He had gone to do something right, something dangerous. She reread the line about bravery. How many nights had she cursed him for leaving? How many times had she thought he just walked away? Now every story she built around his silence fell apart in her hands. She waited until Margaret returned home from her evening shift. The living room light was soft, the same amber shade that used to fill their dinners years ago. Lila held the letter out without a word. Margaret froze when she saw it. Her eyes widened, not in surprise, but in recognition. She sank into the couch, silent for a long moment. Then she whispered, "I knew about that letter." Lila's stomach tightened. "You knew?" Margaret nodded, tears gathering. "He mailed a copy to me the day before the accident. I hid it because I didn't want you to hate him for leaving or love him too much to move on." Lila felt anger, confusion, love, all tangled. "You thought hiding him would help?" "I thought keeping you safe from hope was mercy." The words hit harder than any confession could. For 10 years, they had grieved the same man from 2 different truths. The coat still lay across the table, a quiet witness to both of them. A gust of wind blew through the open window. The flame on the candle beside them flickered. For a heartbeat, the coat sleeve shifted, falling toward the floor. Lila reached out instinctively to catch it, but stopped. She let it fall. The sound it made, soft, final, broke something open in the room. Margaret began to cry. And this time, Lila didn't hold back either. 2 decades of silence poured out between them like rain returning to the sea. Why does the truth always come too late? When the crying faded into breathing, Margaret whispered, "He wasn't supposed to go that night. I begged him to wait. He said, 'If not me, then who?'" Lila closed her eyes, and he never came back. They sat like that until the candle burned down to wax, and the house felt lighter somehow, as if the air itself had exhaled. The coat lay folded on the floor, empty, yet full of everything that remained. Later that night, Lila placed the letter in a small box beside the door. She looked at the coat one last time before turning off the lights. "Good night, Dad," she said softly. Upstairs, she couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying the same line from the letter, "Grow braver than I ever was." What did he mean? Was there something else he left behind? Near midnight, thunder rolled again in the distance. Lila got up, walked downstairs barefoot, and picked up the coat once more. This time, she noticed something strange, a seam along the collar, slightly uneven, like someone had stitched it by hand. She tugged gently. A small piece of fabric gave way. revealing a hidden pocket. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was a flash drive. Her heart skipped. She didn't even know if it would still work after all these years, but when she plugged it into her laptop, the screen flickered, and an old video opened. For a moment, the image was grainy. Then James appeared. Same jacket, same grin. He looked tired, but determined. "Hey, Lila," his voice said through the static, warm and trembling. "If you're watching this, I guess I didn't make it back for dinner." The room went completely still. Only the hum of the old refrigerator filled the silence. On the screen, James adjusted the camera, his hand slightly shaking. "I didn't want to leave this way," he said, forcing a smile that almost held. "But there are things a man can't look away from. If I don't make it, tell your mom I tried to do right, and tell yourself, don't wear fear like a coat. It keeps you warm, but it never lets you move." Lila sat frozen. Every word sounded like it was meant to reach through time and land directly inside her chest. James looked into the lens again. "When you're older, if you ever wonder why I didn't come back, just remember, love doesn't leave. It lingers, like the smell of home after rain." He chuckled softly. "Guess I should stop talking before you call me dramatic. Love you, kiddo." The screen went black. Lila didn't realize she was crying until a tear hit the keyboard. Her chest rose and fell in heavy, uneven breaths. She replayed the video twice, 3 times, each time. The same sentence hit harder. "Don't wear fear like a coat." When Margaret came downstairs, she found Lila sitting in the dark, the laptop still open. The video paused at James's last smile. Margaret covered her mouth, eyes wide. "Is that—" Lila nodded. "He left it for us." Margaret sat beside her daughter, unable to speak. They watched the video together, not as two people grieving, but as two people listening. The silence that followed wasn't painful anymore. It was full. The next morning, Lila took the coat outside. The sun was rising over Millford, washing the town in pale gold. She hung the coat on the porch railing. For the first time, she noticed how beautiful it looked in daylight, faded, worn, but still holding its shape. She brushed the fabric gently. "You kept his words," she whispered. "Now it's my turn." Later that week, Lila visited the Millford Community Center, the same place where her father once volunteered, fixing cars for families who couldn't afford repairs. The director, an elderly man named Carl, recognized her immediately. "You're James's girl, aren't you? He taught me how to rebuild an engine with nothing but patience and bad coffee." Lila smiled. "He taught me something too, just took me 10 years to understand it." She placed the coat on a hook by the front door. Beneath it, she taped a small card with her father's words written neatly. "Don't wear fear like a coat." Carl watched quietly. "You sure about leaving it here?" Lila nodded. "He left it for us. Maybe it's time it helps someone else walk through their own door." As she turned to leave, sunlight spilled across the coat. The thread shimmered softly, like it was exhaling. That night, the house felt different, lighter. Margaret sat by the window, knitting something new, a scarf in deep navy blue. Lila leaned against the doorway, watching. "You're making it for Dad?" she asked. Margaret smiled. "No, for you." The clock ticked, steady and warm. For years, their home had been a museum of what was lost. Tonight, it became a place of what remained. Lila took the scarf in her hands. The yarn was soft, imperfect, human. She laughed quietly. "You know, I used to think if I opened that door, he'd be standing there." Margaret's eyes softened. Maybe he was, just not the way we expected. Outside, the rain started again, gentle, steady, familiar. Lila walked to the door and opened it wide. Cool air swept in, carrying the scent of wet earth. She didn't flinch this time. She stood there, letting the rain touch her face, listening to the sound of it against the porch. Somewhere in that rhythm, she imagined her father's voice, steady, kind, full of unfinished sentences. She whispered, "You made it home, Dad." A small beam of light from the street lamp caught the picture frame on the wall, a photo of James in his workshop, smiling behind grease-stained hands. The camera lingered on it, then on the empty hook by the door. The wind pushed the door gently until it almost closed, but stopped. Just before the latch clicked, it stayed slightly open, as if waiting for the next story to begin. Maybe some doors should never be shut completely. Sometimes, life doesn't close a door. It leaves it open just enough for light to find you again. Lila thought her story ended with a promise broken, but it wasn't goodbye. It was a beginning she didn't recognize yet. Every coat, every letter, every silence, they all hold a moment when pain pivots into purpose. Maybe your story has one too. Maybe it's waiting by your own door. If this story moved you, stay. There are more moments like this, quiet, honest, and true, waiting to be found. This is Pivot Stories, where every ending turns into something worth coming home to.